All right, guys, week 3, Project Unicorn. This week I want to talk about, ironically, something I'm struggling with, proverbial mountain to climb, if you will. I feel like it will be good to, hopefully not every week, although it wouldn't be bad, it would show I'm diving headfirst into problems, but every week kind of talk about one issue, one problem I've been working through, my thoughts on it, the way I'm approaching it. It's way too sunny here. Let's go this way. And yeah, hopefully revisit it in a week or more, and that problem's been solved. So, problem I'm dealing with and have been dealing with it as I've started building Outspoken is this idea of, so a little bit of background on the topic. I'm building the app as an iOS app to work on iPhones to begin with. It's written in Swift. Now, Swift has a UI framework, and for those of you who don't know, UI is how the app looks. The buttons, the text, all of that is the UI, everything you interact with. It's called the user interface. And so Apple or Swift has this UI framework called UIKit. They had it for several years, and that's what most of the main apps, the big apps in the App Store are built using. It's a very difficult to use framework. That being said, it gets the job done, so that's what people have been using. So, bringing us to today, there's been this new framework that was actually just released last year. They're going to have another update next month called Swift UI. It's a much quicker way of building the front end, the user interface. And so I learned that, the first day it came out, I was super hyped about the fact that you could build these interfaces in a lot faster and a lot easier. And so bringing us to the problem, given that it's such a new framework, there's not a lot of documentation on it, and especially there's not a lot of documentation about how to connect a view built in Swift UI with other views built with UIKit. And so that integration is a lot of experimentation. That's just me figuring stuff out that really there isn't a resource for. I can't Google it. I can't necessarily ask someone. Nobody else has really experimented. Some certainly have, but you don't always have those people immediately accessible to you. And the forums, if you don't have an answer, sometimes you're just stuck and you have to figure it out yourself. So that has been a challenge, obviously. I'm new to programming in the first place, so getting over those challenges was one hurdle. This is another one, but I wanted to share it because I feel like it highlights a couple things. One, the only reason I'm faced with this challenge in the first place is because I decided to learn Swift UI, the new framework, and build using that new framework. Otherwise, I would be just using UIKit. There would be a ton of resources. I could just look everything up. But the fact that I'm using this new framework, although in the short run is making things take longer and maybe more difficult, in the long run is going to be a lot better. The app is going to be better performing. I'm going to be able to do a lot more with the user interface, and ultimately it's going to scale for longer. It's more painful in the short term, but a better long run decision. So I would suggest, as my parting words on this part of it, dive headfirst into the newest things if they make sense to you. Not just anything arbitrarily, but if you feel like this is going to make sense, but it might be really hard to learn right now, it's going to be hard to learn whenever you start it. You might as well dive in and start getting to work right now. Anyway, I'll update you guys. Hopefully, get more comfortable with this integration and get things moving. Alright guys, so let's talk about this week, hold myself accountable. What did I get done? Did I meet my goals? Short answer was yes. This was a great week. I was able to fix up the topic detail, get the basic layout going. So when you tap into a topic, you're going to be able to see the creator of the topic itself, all of the people who responded to that topic, and then you'll be able to tap into each person and view their video and kind of swipe through those. That part's not in yet, but the basic template is in there for the actual layout. The second thing was the API. There was a specific thing with a notification that wasn't working. Fixed that. I won't get into too much detail on that because I want to kind of give you more context before I get into that. But basically, a notification that I fixed with the API. And then final thing is actually I left it as a wild card last time, and I genuinely didn't know what I was going to work on this week for that third thing. But it ended up being a bigger project than I thought. So what I worked on last week. And this past week and going into next week is basically a re-architecturing of the app itself. So all of the logic, or most of the logic, will stay in place. It'll still have the same functionality, but I'm going to be building it from a functional programming perspective, with a single store, single source of truth, rather than a bunch of different views and a bunch of different controllers. A lot of differing opinions on this. The short answer is this is basically something that's going to pay off in the long run. In the short run, it's going to be a lot more work, but I think it's going to be cleaner, easier to debug, easier to test in the long run, and ultimately easier to add features. So I think it's a long run, a good choice. All right, so what am I working on this week? Obviously at the top, the composable architecture. So now it's an open source library. Shout out to the guys at Point Free. They put out this open source library called Composable Architecture, which basically makes your code a lot easier to test, a lot easier to debug, and even easier to add more features. It's a very constrained building system. It's a lot to take in at first, but I think it's a long-term payoff. Like I said, this is not obviously a short-run thing, and so I want to build things with a strong foundation, and I think from an architectural standpoint, this is the right way to go. So I talked about it last week. Dive in. You might get lost at first, and I certainly have been at times this week, but eventually it's going to pay off. If you believe it's the right move for the long term, play forever. Play for the long run. That's number one. Number two is becoming even better at using the command line and Git. I'm familiar with both. For those of you who are not familiar with the command line, it's basically what everybody used to communicate with computers before we had a graphical interface where you can kind of point and click at different things. People, entering in commands on this black screen with white letters on it. That's the command line. You can do essentially anything. You can connect to remote computers. You can access every file on your own computer, change security settings, all that. But it's also useful for version control as it relates to the app. Version control, for those of you who don't know, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's a way to keep track of different versions of your app. So if you make changes, you can always revert back to an older version. If you have multiple people working on, a single app, you can, it's almost like a Google Docs. Whereas when you're working on your own local environment, it's like the Microsoft Word, where you have it, same type of program. One is just isolated to your computer. One is, can be collaborative and online. And so just becoming more familiar, pulling, pushing, using Git and GitHub. And then final, again, I'll leave it as a wild card this week. I feel like this week, because I left that third one open, I left myself open to, like I said, taking on a bigger project than I thought I would have in terms of re-architecting the app itself. But it's the right long-term decision, and so yeah, maybe not quite as big of a third item this week, but I'll leave that as a wild card and update you guys next week. As always, like, subscribe, give me your feedback. If you have thoughts, leave a comment. Talk to you next week.